Welcome, artists, to our gratitude graffiti lesson today. You have a list of all the languages that are spoken by students and their families at our school. If we've missed one, just let me know and I'll help you find it so that you can use that if it's not on here. You're going to choose one language to write thank you. So you can use English, you can choose a language that you're connected with, that your family speaks, or you can choose one that you just think is really cool. You're going to be writing it in bubble letters or block letters. You can be creative with how you write those letters. So I'm just going to stick with the English for right now. And you want to fill the whole page. Exclamation points are optional. So I'm first sketching really lightly, and I'm just playing with the letters. I want to make sure it's all going to fit, so that's what part of the reason I'm sketching lightly. And again, being creative with the letters. If I want to go to some overlapping here, I can do that. I might combine my uppercase and lowercase letters. Oops. Again, this is where it's good to have drawn lightly. I didn't really want that line to come there. So, and, ooh, I really spread out the thank part. All right, so now I've got it sketched. The next step is I'm going to use watercolor to paint the negative space. The negative space is the background. The positive space would be the object. In this case, the object is letters. So I'm going to paint the background, the negative space around the letters using different watercolor techniques. So some of these techniques overlap with other paint techniques that you've probably used. The big difference with watercolor paint is water comes first in the name, watercolor. So we want to have more water than we have paint. And when we do tempera paint, we want it to be opaque or solid so that we can't see through it. When we do watercolor, we want it to be transparent. So transparent is see-through so that I can have a variety of marks and textures, and the watercolor doesn't get too thick and sticky. So I'm going to start with outline and fill in, outline and fill in, just outlining the shape and then filling it in. And with our backgrounds, our negative space, we can again play with how we fill them in. So I'm just going to put that on and let it dry. A technique that we can use with watercolor that's a little bit different than some other paints is I can put the water on and it's sort of shiny. You can see where it's shiny. And then I'm going to come back in and I'm just going to drop a bit of watercolor paint into it. And when I tip the page, it follows that line that I drew with the water. It'll create some interesting visual effects as well as it dries. You can sort of see the swirl on there, and I can just go back and forth. And if I want to make it a little darker, just dab a little bit more in there. Okay, so putting down just clean water that doesn't have any paint in it yet, and then dabbing some water on top of it. Connected with that, I can outline the edge of a shape here with almost at the edge of how much dark we want it to be, right? Because we want it to be still see-through. And then if I rinse my brush and come right next to it with the wet brush, it's going to bleed in and I'll get value. So it's going to go dark to light, and it'll happen just automatically because I'm laying the water next to the wet paint. So it's not wet on wet yet, but it is wet next to wet. Okay. Little lines and marks. So that could be stippling, where we use little dots to fill in a space. Oopsie. And I'm not going to worry about when I drop something like that and I get a little bit on there. I can wipe it off, but I'm just going to let it become part of the overall artwork. Okay, so stippling, little dots, little lines. Let's go over here. We'll do little lines that way. I can do some hatching. Little lines could be checkmark shapes, letters that are repeated. If you're a person who loves math, you might repeat math symbols or numbers. Okay, so that's little lines and marks. And again, you notice I didn't add any paint to my brush, and so I'm showing value again. Dark where it was original, and then it goes to medium over here, and then light because I have less and less paint on the brush. So my red is pretty much dry at this point. So I'm going to take some wet yellow paint and just do some textures and patterns over top. So I'm doing wet on dry. Oops, and I just stuck my finger in the paint. Okay, so wet on dry. It's going to give a different effect than if I were to do the red over here. And while it is still wet, if I come in with that yellow and I drop in dots or lines, the wet on wet technique, it's going to spread and blend and mix together. And I'm just going to take that while those colors are mixing on my brush and spread that out into here. And I'm just adding and filling, and I'm going to fill the whole space around the letters. Okay, we'll leave the letters blank. A technique you could do is to put down a layer of wet paint and I want it a little bit darker, a little more saturated with color. While it is still wet, if I take a small piece of paper towel here and I want to crumple it up so it has some interesting texture that I can see, right? And then if I just press with the paper towel, it's going to create texture. I can also, making sure I have enough water in the paint well, crumple up and gently dab the paint to create a different texture. Okay. If you choose to do the splatter technique, let's see, we haven't used orange yet. If we choose the splatter technique, you want to make sure you've got plenty of water because water is how it's going to come off of the brush. So I'm just swirling it around in there. Make sure it's nice and wet. And I want to control it. I am controlling as much as possible where the paint is landing. I'm going to get a little bit of it in places I don't want, but I shouldn't be spread all over the table or my friends or myself. If I need it to come off the brush more, add a little bit more water. Okay, a little more water, a little more paint. All right. So once you've got your whole page negative space filled, I'm going to trade this out for a different one. You are going to get one of the black flare pens and you are going to create different patterns and textures inside your letters. So some of you may have done Zentangles before. And so I'm just going to, where these letters are connected, I'm just going to Do that. And then I'm going to divide these letters into some different shapes. If you want to outline the letters, you could, or you can just leave the lines inside. And then I'm just going to create a series of patterns. I want to create as many different patterns, interesting and unique patterns, as I can. So here I'm starting with this scallop. I can do all sorts of variations on the scallop as I go. I can also add to this pattern. So I might go back in and go around and add a second line inside. And maybe I'm going to alternate rows. So it's a single, double, single, double. And I want to fill this whole space. This part is not about racing. It's just about taking your time to enjoy the marks. And maybe while you're making the marks, thinking about the teacher that you had in kindergarten, or maybe your favorite school counselor. If you've been at different schools, what school do you remember from when you were really little, and a teacher there? Okay, so I'm going to just keep going, and maybe there is a family member who has helped you get to the end of sixth grade. And so you're thinking about that person and thanking them for what they've done for you. And just going to play. I might do a pattern that is nature connected. Okay, so you can do very geometric patterns. I can do nature patterns. I love doing bubble-like patterns. So each letter should have at least 3 different unique patterns in it. Okay, each letter should have 3 different unique patterns in it that you don't have somewhere else. Now, that means you might make variations. So I'm doing these bubbles, but I could do a variation on the bubbles. What if in my O over here, I could do them bubbles like this, right? It's connected, it's similar, but it's a very different pattern effect than the bubbles over here. So you can start with a pattern and then create a theme. So have fun with your gratitude graffiti and thinking about all of your teachers, your counselors, your family members who have helped you get to the end of sixth grade. Congratulations.